is an English major. And as you might expect from an English major, the usage of words is very important to him. And without a doubt, one of his biggest pet peeves is the misuse of these two words, literally and figuratively. Specifically, he gets frustrated when people say the first when they actually mean the second. For instance, when someone hasn't done something for a very long time, they might say, "Wow, I haven't done that in literally a million years." Or again, if someone has just seen an exciting sporting event, they might say, "What a game! I was literally glued to my seat." Of course, in both of those cases, the person didn't mean literally. What they meant was figuratively. Knowing Andrew's annoyance with the misuse of these two terms, one that I must confess I also share, I got him a t-shirt for his birthday that reads, "Misuse of literally makes me figuratively insane." As I look at this morning's gospel lesson, it occurs to me that these two words, literally and figuratively, play a very prominent role, even though John doesn't use either one of them. John sets the stage for us in the very first verse. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. John introduces us to a blind man, which he is clearly using in a literal sense. This man was physically unable to see, a condition we are told that he suffered from since birth. And while this man is the only one in the story who is literally blind, this theme of blindness and sight is dominant throughout the entire chapter. This morning, I would like to look at two groups of people in this story who are blind. Not in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense, or you could also say a spiritual sense. The first group are the disciples of Jesus. As they are walking along with Jesus, they also see this blind man. But they also ask Jesus a question that shows how blind they truly are in a figurative sense. "Rabbi," they said, "who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, out of fairness to these disciples, there was some biblical support for this question. After all, in the book of Ezekiel, the prophet speaks about how each person will be punished according to his own sins. And again, in the book of Exodus, we read, "The Lord by no means clears the guilty, but visits the iniquity of the parents upon the children, and the children's children, to the third and fourth generations." But I would argue that in asking this particular question, the disciples were figuratively blind to the man who was standing right in front of them. They didn't see a man who was in need of compassion. Instead, they saw only a situation that could lead them into an interesting debate, one in which they immediately tried to assess blame. Sadly, there are times when we as the church suffer from this same kind of blindness. When a natural disaster strikes, we hear some Christians argue that this was God's judgment on their sinfulness. When a person dies, we hear some people say that if only the family had more faith, their loved one would still be alive. But Jesus helps the disciples and us to see that there is a different way of looking at things. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus says. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. And then to fulfill his own words, Jesus made some mud, spread it on the man's eyes, and sent him to wash in the pool of Siloam. And when the man returned, I believe that 2 miracles occurred. The formerly blind man received his sight, literally. And the disciples were also able to see, figuratively, as Jesus opened their eyes to see that God can indeed work good through all circumstances. And while the miracle that Jesus performed brought literal sight to this blind man and figurative sight to the disciples, there was one group that remained blind throughout, in a figurative sense, of course. This group was the Pharisees. As we look at this gospel lesson, they seem unwilling to open their eyes to see what Jesus had done. Even after they meet this man and listen to his story, the Pharisees still declare this verdict on Jesus. This man, they said, is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. Again, there seems to at least be some merit to their argument. According to the 3rd commandment, the Sabbath day was to be strictly honored and observed. No work was to be done on that holy day. And according to the tradition of the Pharisees, one such forbidden work was healing. And so, because Jesus healed this particular man on the Sabbath day, it was easy for them to see that he was not from God. In fact, just a few verses later, they will even label him a sinner. As we read through the Gospels, this remains the stance of most of the Pharisees, at least, throughout Jesus' entire earthly ministry. Despite the fact that they literally saw what Jesus did for others, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, they could not open their eyes to see that this was all from God. And consequently, they remained spiritually blind. I believe that the Pharisees' example remains a cautionary tale for all of us religious people. when it comes to God. We may think that we know it all. We may think that we see everything clearly, when in fact we don't see very well at all. Jesus' words that he shared toward the end of this lesson, we should at least pay some attention to. I came into this world for judgment, he said, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. And that brings me back to the blind man, because I believe that the first part of that quote applies to him. For Jesus gave him the ability to see, not only in a literal sense, but even more importantly, in a figurative, spiritual sense. Notice the progression that this man goes through after Jesus gives him his physical sight. When his neighbors ask him how he was healed, he first replies, "The man called Jesus made mud and spread it on my eyes." At this point, he describes Jesus simply as a man. Next, when the disciples first confront him, wanting to know what he thinks about Jesus, the man gives a fuller explanation. He is a prophet, he says. When the Pharisees interrogate him yet again, wanting to know what he thinks, he gives even a further detail. If this man were not from God, he says, he could do nothing. And finally, when Jesus encounters this man at the very end of the lesson, we are told that he makes a profession of faith in Jesus, and then he worships him. In the way that John tells this story, we notice how Jesus helps this man to see him more clearly in a figurative sense. We see how Jesus opens his eyes more fully in a spiritual sense. For he goes from simply describing him as a man to making a profession of faith in him as his Lord. As we head out of worship this day and back into our daily lives in the week to come, may we ask the Lord to open our eyes, literally and figuratively, that we might see what he wants us to see. And then by his grace and his power, may we have the courage to respond. Amen.
Amen.
Our hymn of the day